Hey, one more thing before you go. In this episode, we're going to talk about expectations, where they come from, how they motivate us, how they blow our self esteem, and how to fix them. We all have them. They're all put upon us from the time we're born until the day we die. But how do we manage those? How do we stop being upset when we fail to meet them? The good news is there's a method for us to understand the basis of expectations, how to work with them, how to manage our daily life without being overwhelmed. Stay tuned as we take and we talk to an author, an improv performer who will help us understand these secrets by using improv actually, and how to be a happier, more relaxed person in our lives. I'm your host, Michael Hurst, and this is The Thing About What to Expect When Having Expectations. Hey, my guest in this episode is Ben Winter. He's an author, he's a speaker, he's an actor, and he's an improvist, as I said earlier. He's an entrepreneur, a traveler, a father, and so much more. He's flown an airplane on his own, he's scuba dived in the Galapagos, he's viewed the animals of Tanzania up close and personal, and he traveled all over the world with a 6-month-old child in tow. That's definitely meeting your expectations. Ben has performed and teaches improv for over a decade, acted in several plays, even a movie. We have that in common. He loves to explore, especially physical places around the world, as well as the mind. He's written a book about it, and that's what we're going to talk about in this episode. Welcome to the show, Ben.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, what an interesting, diverse background you have.
I know it's really weird hearing it come out of somebody else's mouth because it's like, wow, I really have done a lot of things in my life.
Well, that's what life's all about, right? We should all enjoy life a little bit more and get to experience the many things that it has to offer. Sometimes part of my program, one more thing before you go, is people not getting to say or do what they wanted to do before it was too late. So it's a good thing you did all that.
Absolutely.
Well, let's talk about you. Let's unfold your story if you don't mind. Where'd you grow up?
So I grew up in Denver, Colorado, and I am still in Denver, Colorado. So I haven't really moved too far away. Like I said, I'd like to explore the world, but I always find my way back here. So
Well, I miss Colorado. I grew up in Colorado. That's my home state. I live in Arizona now, and we used to live in Colorado Springs. I grew up in Colorado Springs.
okay,
Um, I only bring that up because we now have that in common, Colorado.
indeed.
We moved to Woodland Park. I lived in Woodland Park for like 15 years before we moved here. I was a cop in the Springs area, and I miss Colorado. Miss the trees.
Yeah, well, there's not a lot of
Yeah,
trees here, but there's definitely fewer down there.
well, and yeah, that's the thing. The thing with here, they go, oh, we have trees, we have mountains. It's like, well, these are baby mountains, and these aren't real trees. The real trees are the evergreens and the big trees. What was your
Yeah.
family like?
Uh, Good family, very supportive, caring. Yeah, my parents are still around, so I'm grateful for that. And they're enjoying being grandparents. And I honestly I feel like they're better grandparents than they were parents. But second time around, you don't have as many responsibilities. You can just kind of play. So I kind of get it.
Oh, exactly. It kind of works. It works to a benefit. You have any brothers,
Yeah,
sisters?
I have an older brother who lives out in California, and he's doing some amazing film work. He's in the uh, post production world out there, so
Oh, very
he's had
cool.
his name in a lot of big movies. It's pretty impressive and fun to watch.
That's pretty cool. We have that in common. My kids live in California, and they're in the entertainment industry
Hey, there you go.
themselves. So small world, eh?
It is.
Small world, small world. Did you go to university?
I did. I went to Northern Colorado. It's just
Which is
didn't have the grades to get into CU, so I went to the smaller school up in Northern Colorado.
Just works.
Yeah, hey,
Would you study?
It was a business degree, and there was kind of an emphasis in the computer world, and this was all kind of before the .com crash in 2000. So, I was expecting to get out of. Speaking of expectations, I was expecting to get out of college and having a nice paying cushy job waiting for me just because there were so many of them, and everything crashed right before I graduated. So go
Yeah,
figure.
it's kind of throws a little wrench in the forward momentum.
Indeed, it did.
Do you have any other aspirations about what you wanted to be when you grew up, other than into that?
I keep thinking back when anybody's like, "What did you want to be when you grew up?" And I wanted to be so many different things. And unfortunately, TIE fighters don't exist yet. And the Star Wars universe doesn't exist here. So it's kind of hard to be a TIE fighter pilot, you know?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'm still struggling with that myself.
Yeah.
It's yeah, it's like it didn't come up quick enough. Didn't come up
No.
quick. And I grew up with Star Trek too. So I mean, and theoretically, when you look at this little computer in my hand and
Right.
communicator on my wrist, we're living Star Trekky just a little bit, just a little
Just a
bit.
little. Yeah.
And with who is it, Bezos and well, other millionaires and the billionaires are going to space. So eventually we might get there.
Yeah. It's been interesting. So I'm writing a sci-fi novel, and because sci-fi is kind of my favorite genre to read, and there's a common theme amongst all futuristic space exploration things is that it's governments against corporations. And
Oh, it's
as we're
interesting.
seeing, corporations are faster at getting to space than our government is. So,
Yeah, that's
you
right.
know,
Yeah, wow.
and NASA's even like sending stuff to SpaceX to send it into space because they're faster and more efficient. And it's like, well, it's not going to be the government that colonizes space. It's going to be corporations that do it. So,
And that's wow. That's unfortunate. That's wow. I haven't thought about it that way, other than, I mean, watching it. I'm unfold. I watched the land. This gives my age away a little bit. I watched the first landing on the moon. I watched the first um, astronaut that circled the Earth on TV. I watched all of that evolve into the space shuttle, and then the space shuttle back to rockets, actually, which is kind of strange. But what you just said kind of opened my eyes to something kind of different. You having
yeah.
corporations to kind of take over space. That's
I mean, based on how things are going, I think SpaceX will reach Mars with people before NASA does. So, if that proves
wow.
anything, that's just the first step in corporations kind of taking over out there.
Now you've speaking of writing, you've written a lot of books. Have you always wanted to be an author, a writer?
It's funny if you would have told me 5 years ago. Um, well, actually, it's been long enough now, maybe 10 years ago, um, that I would have published a book, let alone several. I would have said you're crazy. I don't even like reading. Um, but yeah, I got divorced about 7 years ago now, I think, and it was right about that time that I really started getting into reading and figured out that my genre is sci-fi, and um, but that obviously doesn't affect writing personal growth books and self-help
Right.
books, which is what I've mainly written up to this point. But that all came from also the same point in time where I learned more about who I am and what I wanted to do, which was really to kind of teach improv to the masses because improv had been so integral in my life and making life easier and more fun. So I thought, hey, let me teach this to like corporations for team building and groups of people for relationships and for so many different things. And so
Yeah,
that's where
that's
the first books came out of.
it's really interesting the perspective of using improv
Yeah.
to help daily activities or work activities, how that incorporates that. Because everything, when we think of improv, you think of a comedy routine where they say, you know, we want you to be this and doing that and saying this, and then they create something out of it. So how does that principle play into helping people like in work life or daily life?
Yeah, so if you think of it in terms of what do we do on a daily basis, we improvise. We don't know how our day is going to look. We don't know who we're going to run into, what conversations we're going to have, and so it's all improvised. And what most people don't realize when they watch those comedy shows with improv, the most common is "Whose Line Is It Anyway?" You'll see them all performing, and if you know the rules of improv, you'll see that they're following those rules of improv. And if you've ever seen a bad improv show, and it's probably at like a local theater, but it's really bad and you're just like, I don't know what's happening. This is uncomfortable. It's painful. It's probably because somebody wasn't following the rules of improv on stage. Might have been multiple people not following those rules. But what I found is that when I follow the rules of improv, I have a better, more productive, and fulfilled day. And when the people around me are also following the rules of improv, we just have a lot more fun in general. Communication increases, negativity decreases, productivity increases. People feel more valued when you're in a group and everybody's doing improv, and it's an amazing tool to learn and to teach, and it's just very vital that everybody realize there are rules to improv, and once you know those rules, you're going to have an easier time at life.
That's an interesting approach, a great principle, I think. Adaptation, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but adaptation is a key to success in just about every aspect of your life. You need to learn to kind of
Yes.
switch or change or adapt to something.
Yeah, and that sometimes that adaptation is moment by moment by moment. So it's not like, oh, today I have to adapt to it's the fact that it's raining. It's, oh, I'm
Yeah,
starting this new conversation with somebody I've never talked to before. I need to adapt, and as they say something else, I have to adapt to that, and so on. And it keeps just going.
my career in law enforcement taught that to us. You have to adapt on an instantaneous basis every day.
I
It's
bet.
yeah, yeah, it's unique. That's what some people whole different discussion, but armchair quarterbacks when they see a situation go down somewhere, they just don't understand what led up to it, and don't understand what transpired prior to it. Don't understand. There's always extra things that have to take place, extra things that show up, and it's crazy. But hey, life is good still. So I know
That's
you
true.
traveled the world, as I said earlier, and
Mhm.
so when did you start traveling?
Uh, wow. Probably in my early 20s, I started traveling. And um, somebody I was dating at the time wanted to go to Tanzania. And I was just like, I don't think you should go by yourself. She's like, you want to go with? I'm like, yeah, I'll go. So I went to Tanzania just because I didn't want my girlfriend going alone.
Well,
But it turned out to
good
be an
reason.
amazing adventure. So whatever.
Yeah, that would. I mean, I've never been to Tanzania, but if you saw the animals there, those are very unique, and it's still an amazing journey. I mean, different culture, different
Absolutely.
side of the world. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Um, and I have to ask you about this because I have a passion for flying.
Oh,
How'd you
sure.
fly a plane by yourself?
Well, I decided at some point when I was doing a lot of personal growth work that I wanted to fly a plane on my own. And this is a testament to be careful what you ask for, because I never said that I wanted to get my pilot's license, right? I just wanted to fly it on my own. So I went ahead and took pilot or flight training, and I was up there with my instructor. I was doing all these classes and everything, and we're flying around one day, and he says, "All right, let's go back." And I was like, "Well, that was a short day." We land, we pull off to the side. He says, "Stop the plane." I stop the plane. He gets out and he's like, "All right, go take a run." And I was just like, "Excuse me? You want me to go fly a plane on my own right now?" It was like the most thrilling and scariest thing I've ever done in my life. And taking off on an airplane's easy enough. Flying around in the air is super easy when you're flying a Cessna. Those things are like practically crash proof. Um, or especially stall proof. I could barely ever get that thing to stall, and he's always like, "Stall the plane." I was like, "I don't want to." But anyway, coming in for the landing, it's like, okay, he's not here anymore. It's me in this runway. If I don't land it, I'm dead. It's like there's no other choice here. And And I did, and it was amazing. It was a thrilling thing. But yeah, I never did get that pilot's license. But at the same time, had I gotten it, it would have already expired by now because it's a very expensive hobby to keep up.
Very expensive. Yeah, I've had a friend of mine that I went up with him numerous times. He was with the fire department back in Colorado Springs, actually. And I used to go up with him. And the first time I went up with him, he didn't tell me he was going to stall the plane. And yeah, so that was fun. He just stalled it, and I went, what? Wait a minute, what? The
What's all
engine
these
is not
noises
running.
going on?
He says, oh,
Yes.
didn't I tell you we're practicing stalls?
Yeah. No.
uh, yeah, it was a new experience. Very interesting, actually. So from there, you went, you did scuba diving, and another passion that I kind of wanted to try at one time, but never got around to doing that. See, so you had an expectation of, with all of that, you had an expectation of wanting to learn things, and you implemented that. Did you understand the whole process that you created at that time, or did you come to that realization later?
I'm not following you. Like on the
In other
learning
words,
it.
like, let's back up a minute. So
Okay.
you did your traveling, you had some personal growth, you got married, you have a child, you got
Hmm.
divorced, um, you're obviously a parent, a co-parent of somebody else. Uh, b- at what point did you realize that expectations may or may not be holding us back, and how they play a role in our success or our failure?
Ah, okay. I'm following you now. So in my teachings of improv, there's a rule that I go over which is called be specific. And on stage, if somebody walks out and says, "Hey, how are you?" there's nothing to work with for the other actor, for anybody
Right.
on stage. Nobody has any direction whatsoever. But if you come out and say, "Hi mom, how was your day?" you at least know that this is now a child and mother on stage. It's a little bit more specific, but it's not really setting the stage yet. But if the other person adds a bunch of detail, adds more specificity to it, they might say, "Don't hi mom me, you spilled paint in the garage and I'm upset with you." Well, now we know what this scene is about. It can go many different places, but everybody on stage knows what's happening. The audience knows what's happening, and it was established very quickly. So what I would say when I was teaching this is that the only reason anybody gets upset is because an expectation hasn't been met. And expectations are us being specific about what we want or need. And sometimes we don't know that we have an expectation until it's going unmet. And that just comes from our past and being um, and how we grew up and how we expect the world to work. So when um, so so when I came up with that, I was like, okay, that saying works. It makes sense, but it doesn't solve any problems other than to just tell people be specific about what you say you want. So I sat down with that and I put like "you're upset" on a whiteboard, and I decided let's solve this using expectations. And so the first question I asked myself and on the whiteboard, I said, "Did you know you had this expectation?" Because that's the first thing that we have to understand is sometimes we get upset with somebody else and we didn't even know we had the expectation of them doing something until they're not doing it, and then we're upset with them. But even we didn't know the expectation, so how could they? And so right there you're almost immediately able to stop yourself if you didn't even know you had the expectation in the first place. But from there it asks other questions like, have you shared this expectation? Because a lot of times we're very afraid to share those expectations with other people because what if we get rejected? What if they say no? um, what if they think we're an idiot for having this expectation or whatever it might be? We have these fears of rejection going on, and sometimes the expectations that we have are completely unreasonable. I always talk about traffic. My expectations of how traffic should be and how people should drive is completely unreasonable because in no way, shape, or form can I have a conversation with everybody on the road and have us all come up with the um, same way of doing everything. I mean, there's different vehicles, there's different horsepowers, there's different speeds, and that people have different interpretations of the law, which I'm sure you've seen plenty of people saying, well, I thought I could bend it just a little bit more than you think I should, right?
We
Um,
have we have race drivers and we have grandmas,
yeah,
and,
exactly.
and
And
any and anywhere in between.
exactly. So, and I've had stuff in my back seat that I didn't want falling over. So I've driven really, really slow and careful because I didn't want it to fall over. So when that other person is on the road, I now have to like tell myself like they might be carrying something fragile. And so I just have to let them do that. And so instead of being upset the entire time I was in traffic, it would be now it's like 5 or 10 seconds, because then I remind myself, okay, just let it go. It's all good. And uh, so through this flowchart, I really was able to calm myself down more often. And if I'm not upset as much, then I'm the opposite of upset. I'm, happy or content or, excited, whatever it might be. And I'm one of those types of people that doesn't like coming up with an issue without also having a solution to that issue. Because I just feel like there's too many people complaining about what's wrong in the world and
Right.
not enough people doing anything about it. So,
Yeah, I agree with that. It's I think we grow up with expectations from not only ourselves but from other people. Our parents expect us to get good grades. Your parents expect you to be good, a good child, a good teenager, a good adult. You expect yourself you to be a good person, a good parent, a good father, a good mother, a good brother, a good sister. We all set expectations on ourselves, but society also puts expectations on us. How do we
mhm.
balance all those expectations?
So the beautiful thing is the flowchart that I've come up with. It takes the moment in time of you being upset as the trigger point. And I think that's okay, as long as we recognize that when we're upset, we have a choice. We have something that we can possibly learn from. And the benefit of practicing that over and over and over is that you start to catch yourself before you even get to that point of being upset. And so when we don't even know that we have these expectations from how we grew up, how society wanted us to be, what our parents wanted from us, I often use the example of a parent, a new parent. They're talking to their child does something they don't want, and they start, you know, telling them like, "Hey, don't do that," or whatever it might be, whatever words come out of their mouth, they're like, "I just sounded like my mom, and I swear I would never sound like my mom," right? So many people are like, I will never be like my parents, except then they have a child and then they're exactly like their parents, unless they make a conscious choice to do something different. And that, again, it's just your expectations of how to parent are based on how you were parented. And in today's world, that's very difficult because I grew up without the internet. I grew up without cell phones. I have a whole new set of challenges to deal with
Yeah.
that I've never been exposed to. So, fortunately, I don't have that many expectations on that. Now, my with grades and everything and doing well in school, I definitely want to do something different than what my parents did with me. And so I'm consciously making a choice every time that my child brings up,
Right.
an assignment or a grade or something like that, is like, how do I want to respond? Because if I only focus on the bad grades and not the good grades, then that's where the attention is on the bad grades instead of the good ones. And there's a balance in there of like, how do you feel about it? Because if I empower my son to want to do better, then he's going to do better. If it's that I want him to do better, he might or might not. It's just,
I agree with that.
so
Yeah, I
that's
think
where
we all.
I'm making those efforts. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a good thing. I think that I'm in the same boat as you. We all think we all grow up, and I notice it in my personal life as well as in my professional life. Our children are the reflection of us, and we have a choice to either um, present a good reflection for them to build upon, and take those tools that we provide them to help them grow and learn and become a better person. I know that there are things that I do as a parent that I know that no disrespect. Both my parents are deceased, so I'll say no disrespect in case you're listening. Don't want to get struck by lightning. um, but I mean it. there are things that my parents had done in my childhood that I said, John, I'll never do that with my children, kind of a thing. And I've learned that. And sometimes I have to catch myself, like you just said earlier. Sometimes I have to catch myself and say, well, wait a minute, I'm just acting just like my dad or just like my mother. And I really got to stop that and make a concerted choice, to not do that again, from that perspective. And I like what you said. Empower your child to do better. Don't demand, don't require, don't expect. Empower them to make their decision to be better or to do better. It's a very good
Yeah,
thing.
I mean that's what I'm striving for, because I feel like what my parents did, it just wasn't, there was no incentive for me unless I created it myself to do better. Like, and I'm not talking about like get straight A's and you'll get $1,000,
Right.
or something stupid like that. Although that might motivate my child at this point, but um, but anyway, it's one of those things where it's like I feel like they could have done differently, they could have done better, but at the same time I also have to recognize they did what they felt was right at the time. They did the best that they
Right.
could with the information they had. They did it based on how they were parented, and that's just each generation. It's the same thing, and you learn from your past and how it was done for you, and so on. And secret family recipes, there's nothing secret about it. It's just that's how the family did it for generation after generation, and it's just different than the norm. So
Yes, I agree with you in that regard. Even as in my old line of business, I worked at domestic violence task force for about 4 years, and we were specific to domestic violence, which included not just adults, husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, but children, because they're part of that mix all the way around. And a lot of the um, issues that we saw were the demand for let me make sure I do this correctly. The father or the mother was demanding that the child act a specific way because that's the way they act and that's the way their parents acted and that's what they're supposed to do. Does
mm, yeah,
that
I
make
mean,
sense?
it's for a lot of people it really is so subconscious that they don't even realize what they're doing or saying.
Yeah.
And for there's a lot of things where that's totally okay. On a subconscious basis we learn language, we learn
Yeah.
how to use a fork and knife and spoon, we learn how to tie our shoes, and then we never have to think about it again. And so that autopilot, that programming works in a lot of ways, but it can also be a very big detriment in a lot of ways, and that's where we get to make those conscious choices and choose to do something different.
So do you think we all set goals for ourselves? Yeah, I think that goal setting, in my opinion, is a positive thing because you need to set a goal to be able to reach a pinnacle that allows you the satisfaction of accomplishment. From my perspective, I think that goal setting helps you to determine and strategize how you're going to complete a task or something like that. Do you feel how do expectations play into goal setting?
Yeah, so goal setting and expectations are very interesting in how you view goals. Sometimes is your experience from your past, which means you have expectations of goals, such as, every time I set a goal, I never get it, or I always attain my goals. Then you've put on an expectation around goals in general. So if you never reach your goals and you have an expectation of never reaching your goals, why would you bother setting goals? You're not going to. You're just going to do your thing on a daily basis, and you're probably not going to get what you want. And if you're always getting your goals, that one time that you don't, it's going to be the most detrimental thing ever. Or
Right.
perhaps you set your goals so low and so easy that they're just simply attainable. And again, you're not necessarily getting what you want. Goals are a tricky thing because you want to stretch yourself, but you don't want to set yourself up for failure. And if you're new to goals or you've never gotten your goals before, that's going to take a lot of extra effort because you now have to think like, what what do what can I set that I know I'm going to get, but still is going to make me work for it. And if you're always getting your goals, now's the time to say, how can I stretch myself so it's a little bit harder to get, yet I can still get it? because maybe instead of
Right.
getting 10 yards, I get 20 yards or whatever it might be. And expectations really do play into that, because if you have subconscious expectations of I will never get my goal, but you don't even realize you have that expectation running in the background, then it becomes really kind of hard, and you have to consciously make the choice of setting goals and then setting them in the smart way. And there's so many books on smart goals and how to set those, and but the A is attainable. You have to make sure it's attainable. I use the example: if you're making $50,000 a year, are you going to make $1 million next year? Probably not. That's a huge jump. But maybe you can make 60,000 next year. Maybe you can make 70,000 the next year. Maybe you can make 100,000 that following year, and then maybe it's 200,000, and maybe it's 400,000, and then maybe you're making 700,000, and then you can leap up to a million, right? Um, but you have to give yourself a break, and you're not going to go from 50 to a million just like that. You got to.
Right.
Now some people will. I mean, it happens. People will create some amazing things, and it'll take off, and it'll be great, and congratulations, awesome. But there are for most of the population, you have to work in steps and making your way up there.
So basically, realistic expectations. So have the goal,
Yeah,
but be sure to keep realistic expectations of achieving the goal.
yeah, exactly.
Mm.
If you set that really high, then don't expect to necessarily get it, or change your expectations of the outcome of, say, well, if I get half of the way there, it'll be great. In which case, why
Right.
not set the goal half the way to the one that you just set? So it's this very weird game that you have to play when setting goals, to make sure that you're stretching, but you're also making it attainable.
Yeah, almost like a sometimes with my kids, I have to say, well, some is better than none,
Yeah.
and some is better than nothing. More is a little bit better than that. So how how do you think we should, based upon that, how do you think we should kind of set goals for ourselves with expectations? I mean, you just kind of pretty much laid that out
Mhm.
like you did. Does that fit within the flow chart that you have created?
In a sense, you can think of, there's parts of the flowchart you can absolutely use to ask questions like, is this reasonable? When setting a goal, you're kind of setting an expectation for yourself, but there's expectations on those expectations. So
Right.
expectations are very layered and intermixed, and it's a crazy net of expectations. But like, you have a general expectation around goals, you have an expectation of getting that goal, you have expectations of timeline, etc. So when you're setting that goal, you can just say, is it a reasonable goal? And there's a question: have you shared your expectation? Maybe it's, do I need to share this goal with other people to attain it? And that's a tricky thing, because sometimes sharing your goal can actually hurt you more than help you, because some people will want to sabotage you. So you have to be very careful with who you share your goals and dreams with.
You have an
um,
example of that?
Parents can be very loving and caring, but sometimes they look at their children as like, you'll never make it. And it's not that they're saying that out loud. There's some
Right.
subconscious thing of like, I failed as a parent, my child's never going to make it. And it's just something that they have in them, or they always have a negative thought when it comes to everything. Like, it's always the worst case scenario. And so if you have a goal of achieving, getting into a movie, whatever it might be, and your mom's over there saying, well, you're not good enough, you got too much weight, whatever, I don't think you're that good of an actor. They may not realize what they're saying, but they're kind of like chipping away at your goal and your dream. um, if you have a coach who's on your side, they're totally going after it with you, and you share your goal and dream with them, well, they're going to push you to get there.
Right.
So there's kind of a difference there. Some people have, you could probably relate. You have that friend who's always just negative about everything, and then you have that other friend that's just like a cheerleader. And um, but unless you really know that friend, you don't know what's going on subconsciously for them, because the really negative person be
Right.
like, I really hope they make it, I really want this for them, even though there's the words out loud aren't supporting you.
No,
Where the
right.
other person is really happy, but they're like, what's the word? They're resentful of you. They don't like you getting what you want because they never feel like they're
Jealous.
getting what they want, right? Jealousy. And so it's a very weird situation, but you kind of have to protect yourself from outside forces. So if you have a big dream and big goal, maybe don't share it with anybody for a while until it's got some feet running underneath it, and you can actually say, "Look at what I've done so far." And they'll be like, "Wait a second, I didn't even think you'd make it that far. Like maybe you'll actually
Right.
make it." So, um,
That's a good deal.
but
Do you think?
but there's yeah.
I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just
It's
gonna
a
say
delay
the flow
delay
really
between
does.
the
Yeah,
earbuds.
the flowchart does have some good questions that can help kind of guide you with setting goals. But yeah,
From there. Yeah. Sorry about that. I said delay. These earbuds are the sound is the delay. So my apologies.
it's all good.
Um, what is do you think self-esteem plays a factor in our goal setting or our expectations?
Absolutely. Um, my self esteem was very low until I started taking improv. And, I was doing a lot of personal growth, which was helping, but improv really took it to the next level. And I think what works very well in improv and expectations and everything is when you learn some of this stuff, you'll find that you're living more in the present moment. And there's nothing in the present moment, there's nothing around self esteem, self worth, or anything because it's just here and now. Unfortunately, that here and now is a moment. And so it's very easy for something to creep in and say, "Oh, Ben, you're not good enough at that." Like you'll get really excited about, "Ooh, I'm going to go try this thing because it looks awesome." Oh, yeah, I'm not good enough to try that. All the self talk can come back in and ruin the day. But if in that moment, it was like the most exciting thing that you want to do, and I can do it. I can do it. Let's do it. Um, so those expectations, when it's I would say that that time when your inner voice comes in and says you're not good enough for that, that could be considered being upset. Well, now I'm upset because I can't do that. But then you can say, where is that voice coming from? Why do I have that expectation? Is that my mom talking and all the negativity that she had when I was growing up? Is it always worst case scenario? Did something happen with my childhood friends where, I'm not lovable, I'm not worthy of this thing? And then you really get to explore and say, where's this voice coming from and why is it stopping me from going after what I want right now? And again, the more you practice these things, the faster you are at catching them and the less time you're spending with uh, being self-conscious and not worthy and all those sort of things. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it for anybody. Personal growth is not a it's not a magic wand. There's no quick button. It's you got to practice
Yeah.
over and over and over and over, and even practice in different ways. Not everybody likes Tony Robbins, and some people absolutely love Tony Robbins. If you learn from Tony Robbins, great. If you learn from me, great. If you learn from Napoleon Hill, great. Like as long as you're moving forward and want something more and better in your life and you're practicing that, you're going to have more and better. It's just a matter of practice.
I agree with that. That's a brilliant philosophy, actually. Um, you have mentioned this throughout the conversation, being upset, and I know it's in the flow chart. I've seen it in the flow
Mhm.
chart and in the book. So help us to understand when you use the word upset. I can't because of my hands do quotes, but does we'll say quote upset quote unquote. Does that entail? Is that anger? Is it depression? Is it frustration, or is it a combination of any of all of those?
It can be any of those for sure. Because I think any of those really kind of lend to us not getting what we say we want or think that we want. Um, if depression is, and I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist, so you know, take this with a grain of salt, but depression is one of those things where if it is chemical in nature and it's something going on, then by all means take care of it. I do think depression to some extent is our inner voice constantly just pushing us down and making it hard for us. I definitely have had those times, and I've been super depressed, and I went and got help, and it's possible. Um, but I think if you're able to have some internal dialogue of like, why am I feeling this? Like, what is going on? Like, are there external factors that are feeding into it, or am I just down in the dumps for no reason, or for some perceived no reason whatsoever? And then you can actually have some other conversations of like, does this even make sense to me? If there's an external voice kind of feeding it, like, where is that coming from? Why am I feeling this way, etc. And you can kind of work through it a little bit. If you're frustrated with a problem, sometimes you just have to take a step back. And actually, that's a good feed into this, is that Einstein said that the only way to solve a problem is at a different level than it was created. And I like to interpret that as it's you're not necessarily able to solve an emotional problem emotionally. Sometimes you have to solve it mentally or physically or spiritually. And the flowchart is a mental process for an emotional issue. Going on a run when you're upset or frustrated is a physical way to solve an emotional issue. I mean, most people, if they exercise when they're feeling depressed or angry or whatever, they feel better after exercising. Some people, they're
Mhm.
upset, they're frustrated, they'll go meditate and they'll feel much better. So again, they're solving it at a different level than the emotional level. And so my flowchart and this whole process is really just a mental process for an emotional issue. And I feel like any emotional issue that could be perceived as negative would absolutely fit here.
Yeah, that's very interesting, actually. How does the technique of improv kind of intertwine with all of that? As individuals, do you? We'll talk about your book in a second here, but uh, do you talk about that in the book, like how we? I say we, like I'm got a whole room full of people here. We, we can learn improv in order to help kind of manage that, if that's the correct
In a
word.
manner of, yeah. So my first book is called Living Unscripted, and that's where I kind of talk about improv and how it works in our everyday lives. And I do touch on expectations a little bit in that book when I talk about the be specific rule. And it was only when I started, teaching it and coming up with this, the only reason anybody gets upset piece, is when I really decided to explore expectations as a whole. So in my expectations book, I don't necessarily talk about improv as much. Um, in fact, I'm not thinking of a place where I really do. So it's kind of like the Living Unscripted. If you read that first and then expectations, you could find the parallels very easily. Um, so maybe I'll have to come up with a volume two for expectations and
There
tie
you
it back
go.
in. But yeah, they're very, very intertwined because one of the rules of improv is focus on the present. And when you're focused on the present, there are no future worries or past resentments. And if you don't have those running, then you typically don't have that self talk and self
Right.
doubt and that self confidence issues by living in the present. And that's one of the things that I loved about doing stage improv is by being up on stage, that is your only option, is to be focused on the here and now. And that's
Right.
the rest of the world falls away, all the problems fall away. It's just you, the stage, the people on stage, and you're focused on each other and listening and supporting each other, and it's great. And so, in a manner of speaking, knowing the rules of improv will certainly help with expectations, avoiding possible moments of being upset or catching them early enough that you can do something with it before getting upset.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I used to play. They teach us in the police academy to play what if games when you're driving around. What if
Hmm.
this happens? What if that takes place? What if? And you kind of run these scenarios through your head on a consistent basis so you can kind of be alert and be like that in the present. What if this took place right in front of me? What am I going to do? What if the next call is this? How am I going to react? So yeah, that's pretty cool. I may have been doing improv, and I didn't even know it.
Possibly. And what if is very much a this could happen in the future.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's good for training because then it's almost like muscle training. That's not that's not the word I'm looking for. Muscle memory. It's teaching muscle memory for situations that may arise, and at the same time, that what if could start going the same direction you thought it was, and then change direction really fast. And
Exactly.
and that's where improv really comes in, because you may walk out on stage with somebody else walking out on stage, and you have a great idea for the suggestion that was just given, and the other person starts with a completely different idea. You now have to get rid of your idea and go with theirs in half a second. You
Yeah.
just have to let it go. And so I could see the benefit in what if scenarios. At the same time, they can be detrimental, because if you're out there saying, what if this person attacks me, um, and you have that on your mind, and then you're in the situation where they might attack, but they might do something else. If your muscle memory is they're going to attack because I've been playing this what if, then you're ready for the attack and not for whatever else they're about to do. And so there may be like a preemptive strike, because you think it's going to go one way, but it's going to go a different way. And that I'm sure causes some problems out there. I don't know for sure, but I'm not the expert on that. I just know that in my life, my mom played the what if game a lot. And in my adult life, every time that I play it, not that I want to, it's like, why isn't this person texting back? Right? What if this? What if that? Like, I can come up with thousands of scenarios on why they're not doing something. And I've never been right about it. And so I've learned kind of to let go of what ifs and
What is?
whys and futuristic possibilities, because I've never been right about them.
Well, and adaptation's much easier, actually. We
Yes.
had to adapt to this because our first, we set up an interview prior to this, and I had a medical issue that I had to go take care of, and we had to reschedule.
Yeah.
So we had to adapt. It kind of works this way.
Adaptation is a very good skill for sure.
So how important is it for us to understand that expectations can have a positive or a negative effect on our lives?
So a lot of the positive expectations that we have, we don't even recognize as expectations, because they don't go against what we want. For example, when you wake up in the morning and the electricity is on, you don't think twice about it. You walk to the refrigerator, open it up, and everything's cold, you don't think about it at all. It's when the refrigerator is not running, it's when the electricity is off, that we actually recognize that we had this expectation that it was always there and working. And so I actually say in my book that I'm not really going to address positive expectations, because they're working for us. They're constantly, pick up your new cell phone, you call somebody, you expect it to go through, you expect the internet to be working, you expect the apps to perform as you are used to. It's when the system's down that you're like, oh, I needed to make that phone call, how else can I do it? And so expectations in general typically have a negative connotation, because we don't recognize them until they're not happening the way we want them to happen. And that's the only reason they're conceived as negative, when they're just a neutral thing. There's really, it's just a thing. It's not positive or negative. It's just we recognize it more often when it's a negative thing happening. So as long as you understand that, then you can work through it a little bit easier every single
And to
time.
manage your daily life from that regard. What was your motivation for writing this book?
It was along the lines of I didn't want to create this problem without a solution. And after creating the flowchart, I kept seeing a lot of depth behind all the no's. Like, have you shared this expectation? No, I haven't shared the expectation. There's a lot of depth in there. And so I felt like it was necessary for me to write more about expectations as a whole, using the flowchart as kind of the basis of everything, but talking about where our expectations come from and why we have them, and what to do going forward. And so I really explored the depth of all those no's within the flowchart itself, so they could help people, including myself, get
Right.
happy more often, upset less.
And I know I showed a visual over your shoulder earlier in regard to the book. Tell me the name.
Yeah, the name is What to Expect When Having Expectations.
It's almost it's a catchy title because it's close to, as a parent and an older
Yes,
parent, what to expect when you're expecting. So
exactly.
yeah, so it kind of yeah, it clicks. See, I remember it. Um, what inspires you?
My child definitely is one of the big things that inspires me, to be a better human being, to strive and do more. And at the same time, I love exploring life, and uh, it's amazing what's out there. And sometimes it's hard to find nowadays with social media and the news, but if you look hard enough, you're going to find some amazing things out there in the world.
Yeah, I agree with that. Do you, since you like to explore the mind so much and kind of delve into the depths of it, had you ever thought about becoming a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a therapist from that regard?
I've thought about it.
Kind of a
I'm not sure I want to do the schooling that goes with it, but
yeah, that's the pitfall of that, right?
exactly. There's a lot of schooling involved with that. So
Yeah, it's kind of my niece is a psychiatrist, and we thought she was never ever going to get out of school.
yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. It's like, oh yeah, oh you're finally graduating. When did you start? Kind of crazy. Let's talk a little bit about how your book and how they can find it, and as well as your other books, because you've got several other books actually.
Yeah. So the easiest way is just go to havingexpectations.com, and you can download the flowchart I've been talking about this whole time. You can download that for free. Put it up on your refrigerator in your cubicle or your office or wherever. And there's links to the books on there and all kinds of fun stuff. So havingexpectations.com.
And I'll make sure that those are all in the show notes as well for people, so you have an easy way of connecting with that. And I've downloaded the flow chart myself. It's a brilliant piece of work. It's something that people should kind of use it as a guide if you're getting a little upset or a little frustrated. It'll give you an opportunity to take a breath and kind of sit back for a second and think about the situation instead of just getting upset or just getting angry or just I look at it from those perspectives. So, yeah, and the book itself, again, you can find it on Amazon. I know you have links on your website as well. I you go do let me try that in English. Do you provide classes? I know for corporations and things like that. Do you provide classes for individuals?
I have been looking at a possibility of some virtual classes. So, if you download the flowchart, I believe you'll end up on the newsletter list, which I don't send out very many. But if I do come up with one, I will definitely share it and put it out there for everyone. So,
Positive thing. This is one more thing before you go. So before we go, do you have any words of wisdom or something you'd like to share with the rest of the world?
yeah, I just want everybody to know that it's okay to be upset. I know society says don't do it, don't be upset, chill out, whatever else they say. Um, it's okay as long as you don't stay there. As long as you recognize it as a choice to do something different, then I think it's perfectly okay. And yeah, just remember it as a trigger point for something better.
Positive thing. Ben, thank you very much for sharing your wisdom with me. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you sharing what you've learned. You're vibrant. The people who are going to listen to this, you've had a smile on your face from the whole time that we've been here. You glow with positivity. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of One More Thing Before You Go, a unique conversation about life. If you like our show and want to know more, check out our website at beforeyougopodcast.com. That's beforeyougopodcast.com. Tell your story, share your expertise, contribute to the blog, and subscribe to the newsletter. You can find us as well as subscribe to the program and rate us on your favorite podcast listening platform.
And one more thing before you go. Have a nice day, have a nice week, and thanks for listening.
One More Thing Before You Go, a unique conversation about life podcast, is a creation of One More Thing Productions Established 2010. All rights reserved.